So let's go through this for the observation that we made that sometimes male lions will kill cubs. Okay, and so the question becomes, why do male lions commit infanticide? And then as scientists, we want to determine possible hypotheses that can answer this question. So let's take a look at those first. One hypothesis may be that it's just a pathology, that there's something wrong with these lions. And in fact, this doesn't really hold up because the phenomenon of infanticide is so widespread in so many different places that that this doesn't really hold up for a number of reasons. There's a lot of evidence that kind of just doesn't support the first one. So I'm really going to take a look at the other two. And in fact, I've already sort of knocked down the population regulation hypothesis that we were talking about earlier, that they're killing infants in order to keep population small enough so that there's resources enough to go around. But there's this third hypothesis that may actually be one that makes a lot more sense, this quicker reproduction hypothesis. And what this hypothesis is stating is that if males go into a troop, male lions go into a troop and kill the cubs of females, what will happen is that those females will come back into estrus a lot sooner than they would if he had to wait for her to wean this young and then have it grow up and then she comes back into estrus. But if he kills the cub, she comes back into estrus and then she can mate with him, okay? And then he's then able to get his genes into the next generation. Okay, and again, we want to avoid the anthropomorphizing here of that, oh my God, he just killed her baby and now she's going to mate with him. Okay, so we're not really thinking about this in terms of humans just yet. I do want you to realize that this behavior is pretty widespread, and in fact, this hypothesis has a lot of support for it. Okay, and we're going to look at the scientific method for how that comes about. So we went through the first three here. So we observed a pattern that lions can kill cubs. Male lions killed cubs. Okay, we asked the question, and then we're going to use this hypothesis. If males kill infants, a female will come back into estrus sooner, and he can now mate with her. That's the hypothesis. That's the quicker reproduction hypothesis that I was referring to. And so one prediction would be, if males kill infants to gain access to females, then the cubs he kills should not be related to him, right? If it's population regulation, it wouldn't matter whether they were his cubs or not, or closely related to him. But if it's a quicker reproduction hypothesis and he wants to get more of his genes into the next generation, then he shouldn't be killing his own cubs. And so we could design experiments where you can collect blood samples of cubs and male lions and do paternity tests and then evaluate those hypotheses. And in fact, the data does show that he kills cubs that are unrelated. Okay, so he will not kill cubs that are closely related to him, certainly his own children, but even closer related cubs. And so the data supports this hypothesis right here. And there's other evidence to support this hypothesis as well. And so it's pretty well substantiated that this is often a reason that we see infanticide in animal groups. Just so you realize, infanticide doesn't necessarily go around without its responses, okay? So one response is that females can guard young pretty closely, and there's some other things that can come about as a result of infanticide. I'm going to come back to that in a bit. And now I want to turn to the topics of proximate and ultimate causation. And what we're talking about here in terms of causation is, how do we answer questions in biology, especially in behavioral biology? And there are two different kinds of answers. We can give a proximate explanation to a question or an ultimate explanation to a question. Okay, and so proximate, if you look at this word here, it kind of means like proximity, is sort of like the close answer, the here and now answer to the question, whereas ultimate means like the far answer, the further answer to the question. And mostly what we're talking about is evolutionary answers to the question here. Okay, I'm going to use some examples to explain this a little bit better and to actually be a little bit more specific about what these mean. I'm being very general right now. Okay, so one example of the question is, why do people eat sugary foods? And the first easy answer that you might think of is actually a proximate answer. So the proximate answer would be, well, because they taste good. Okay? So when you eat that candy bar, there are signals that are sent to your brain from the receptors on your tongue that, hey, this tastes good. Okay, so that kind of involves the nervous system in some way. All right? But an ultimate answer to the question of why do people eat sugary foods would be that, well, in the past, people needed energy. And so those people that ate sugary foods and like fruits and things got a lot of energy from that food. So the more energy they had, the more they were able to survive and therefore reproduce, and the more they passed their genes on to the next generation. Okay, and so there was selection for that taste for sugary foods that allowed the taste for sugar to be maintained in modern day populations. Now, it may not work so well in today's environment, and that has a lot to do with how environments change over time. Okay, but notice how the proximate answer to the question, hey, it tastes good, involves a nervous system, and the ultimate answer to the question, hey, humans that ate sugary foods were more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those genes along to the next generation, that's the evolutionary answer to the question. Okay, we can take this other example here. Why do giraffes have long necks? Okay, so again, a proximate answer to the question may be that, well, giraffes with long necks can reach the leaves on the top of the trees and they can get something to eat. Okay, and so the ultimate answer to the question is that those giraffes that had longer necks in the past were able to obtain more resources than ones with shorter necks. And so those with the genes for long necks left more offspring to the next generation, okay, and the next generation, and therefore present-day populations of giraffes are composed of individuals with really long necks because this was a successful strategy. Okay, again, notice the proximate answer, so they can reach the leaves that they can eat. It's kind of a here and now kind of answer that involves maybe the physiology of the organism, the bone structure and muscles of the neck, okay, whereas the ultimate explanation involves evolution. I want to go through a more detailed example of looking at proximate and ultimate causation by using the example of the prairie vole, which tends to be monogamous. Okay, and so here these little prairie voles are a lot like mice or these small little rodents, and we can ask the question, why are prairie voles monogamous? So again, there are several answers to this question, why are prairie voles monogamous? Well, one possible answer is because they have the right neuronal and hormonal pathways and chemicals that allow them to behave in a monogamous way. In the male prairie vole brain, we see that they have an area of the brain called the ventral pallidum, okay? And this area of the brain, if you look at this picture here, you can see that the ventral pallidum actually is loaded with a certain kind of protein that are receptors for the hormone vasopressin, okay? So they have a high density of these vasopressin receptors in the brain. And what happens is that there are other cells in the brain that will produce and release the vasopressin into the bloodstream, and that happens during mating, okay? So when a male copulates with a female, he releases vasopressin. The vasopressin travels to the brain, binds with these receptors, okay? And then what happens is that can trigger some chemical activity that provides the vole with some very positive feedback in the brain. He gets these sort of neural rewards, okay? So he gets the sensation of, hey, this just feels really good, okay? So there's these neural pathways that are activated when vasopressin binds with the receptors in the ventral pallidum of the brain. Again, that triggers this activity that gives them this positive feedback. Okay, and these rewards encourage the male to remain in the company of the female, and this allows him to form a long-term bond with her, and they become monogamous, okay, mostly from the male's behavior. So this is one answer to the question, and notice that it's an answer that involves hormones and the nervous system, and it's therefore a proximate answer to the question. Here's another answer to the question, why are prairie voles monogamous? Okay, well, and this answer says because they have the right gene. Okay, so vasopressin receptors that are in the brain that we just talked about are proteins that are coded for by a particular gene called the V1AR gene. Okay, so this gene codes for the vasopressin receptors. And in fact, this graph kind of shows the results of some experiments. I'm not going to go through all of the particulars on this graph here. But if you take some copies of this gene, which you can amplify in the lab, insert them into a male prairie vole brain, and then calculate the amount of time that he spends with his mated partner versus a stranger, you'll see that he'll spend significantly more time with a partner than with a stranger. And so you can increase his monogamous behavior by inserting extra copies of this V1AR gene. It's like a monogamy gene into his brain. And so again, another answer is because they have the right gene. Notice that this is also a proximate answer to the question. Okay, it's kind of a here and now thing, the genes that make it work, the nervous system that makes it work, a developmental pathway that makes it work. Here's yet another answer to the question, why are prairie voles monogamous? Well, they're monogamous because male prairie voles that formed close attachments to a mate in the past left more descendants than polygynous males, or those males that mate with multiple females. Okay, so this is the result of evolutionary selection processes, and you should right away recognize this as an ultimate answer to the question. Okay, and again, all of these answers, they're not alternative answers. All of these answers are right at the same time. Okay, I'm going to give you one more. Another answer to this question as to why are prairie voles monogamous is because there was a series of changes in ancestral populations over evolutionary time, which caused a shift from polygyny to monogamy. So this answer has to do with the evolutionary history of the species, not just the selection processes, but the whole evolutionary history of that species. And you should recognize this as a cladogram, which we've talked about earlier. And what you can see from this particular cladogram is that polygyny, or multiple mating with many females, is the ancestral condition. And in fact, you can see in today's redback voles and in these other species of Microtus here that they exhibit a polygynous kind of mating system, and that monogamy evolved a little bit later. Here's our prairie vole right here, Microtus ochragaster. Okay, and so within the evolutionary history of this species, there was this shift, and then we can look at reasons for why this shift probably happened.